Welcome back, everybody. We are back on the record. It is June 30th, and we are under docket number 2011-00261. Mr. Jacobs, I believe we are continuing to hear from you with regard to your and your client's rebuttal. If you'd like to call your next witness, please do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could elevate Ms. Pritchard and Mr. Meese, my colleague, Ms. Pritchard, will be directing the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Meese from our witness room.
I don't see Mr. Meese yet.
Likewise.
Mr. Chair, if you could accept our panelist request.
We have someone checking on that, so please give us 1 second. Sorry about the wait.
Ms. Pritchard, it looks like he's in the hearing, the main room, not the panelist room. Is that right?
I think that's right. I think he's just having trouble joining as a panelist. So it looks like someone is over there helping him right now.
Apologies for the delay. We should have this sorted out momentarily.
Do you mind trying again to promote him? Sounds like he had to log off and log back on.
Ms. Amaro, if we could give that a shot, let us know.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and then it just went away and
He's in now.
There he is.
he's in. Great. Sorry for the delay.
All right, Craig, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you too. Great. Let's get started. A lot of build up there. Just a couple of quick questions. On Wednesday, you testified about how KPK is implementing its staff approved spill training plan, which includes training new and current employees on this plan. Today, would you please elaborate on exactly what that training looks like conducted under this plan?
Sure. Yeah. Marcom, via their project manager, Levi Kirk, has conducted 2 different training sessions for KPK and Marcom staff. He's shared that training with myself and our other EHS professional at KPK. And then KPK is working on, as I mentioned previously, on a CBT or computer-based training module for onboarding new employees with this plan and others.
Great, thank you. And would you please explain how KPK implements this spill training plan when a new spill occurs?
Yeah, KPK, our field crews are on site immediately. We isolate and shut in the affected segment or whatever the source is. Once the site is safe, notifications are made to myself and internally. Once I know, I notify Nikki either verbally or email. We collect a source and background sample from the site. We begin excavating impacted material. Once emergency locates are complete, we submit the initial Form 19 within 72 hours of discovery, and obviously make other notifications to landowners within that same day, as well as local governments. The supplemental Form 19 we provide 10 days after discovery to include supplemental information as far as site specifics.
And is it fair to say that KPK generally follows the same process every time?
Yes, since I've been with KPK, yes.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Stafford, any cross?
No, thank you.
Commissioners, questions for the witness? All right, seeing none, I believe the witness is excused and KPK can call its next witness.
Thank you.
KPK calls its next witness for rebuttal, our project manager with Marcom, Mr. Kevin Totkus. He's getting situated where Mr. Meese was, so just one moment, and it's already, I believe, logged in, so it shouldn't take the same amount of time. I do want to just clarify for the commissioners and Ms. Stafford, Mr. Totkus rebuttal testimony will involve the use of another small demonstrative. This was provided to Ms. Stafford last week, and she did not express any objections to it. in case you had any concerns along those lines.
Okay, noted.
Thank you. Mr. Todkis is among the attendees and needs to be elevated. And it looks like he's coming on. Mr. Todkis, can you speak and make sure we're getting your audio?
Test.
Yep, thank you. Very well, we'll proceed with Mr. Todkis. Welcome back, Mr. Todkis. I have a few questions for you on rebuttal. Does KPK have an approved spill release reporting and training plan?
Yeah, they do. It's technically called the spill release notification policy.
Can you please describe that plan and how KPK is implementing it under the CPA?
Sure. The plan is to be used to clearly identify the roles and responsibilities of KPK employees when it comes to spill release and spill release notifications. The plan is also to be used as a guide in the event an employee is unfamiliar with their role in the notification process.
And has KPK trained employees on the plan?
Yeah, KPK has trained their employees on the plan, and they've been implementing since, I believe, July of 2022.
And that was against the final approved plan, I believe.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Todkis, you analyzed the available data on COGCC regarding how KPK has responded to spills and how that compares to Colorado's other major operators. Could you please describe that analysis of COGCC data and the charts and graphs you've prepared?
Sure. I pulled spill release data from a variety of operators and looked at their spills from both the beginning of the year or all through 2022, and then last 7.5 months starting June 1 of 2022. And these graphs represent the data plotted against the number of spills that they had and the producing and well shut-in counts.
Thank you. What's this chart on the left showing us?
Sure. So the left chart on the left shows the total number of spills and their well counts, and there's a trend line there. And based on that trend line, evaluating the total number of spills in 2022, KPK is actually slightly below the trend line in terms of their total number of spills in 2022.
And the chart on the right?
Same thing. Looking at it from just a more shorter time frame, just June 1 to January 19th of 2023, still below the trend line in terms of total number of spills reported.
Thank you. Moving on, please describe what this next pie chart depicts.
Sure. That's just the summarizing all of the spill data that I pulled for that set of operators. And looking at it from that selection of operators I pulled, KPK or KP Kaufman Company is only responsible for about 5% of the total number of spills reported since June 1 of 2022.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next graph. Can you please describe this bar graph titled Form 19 NFA percentage?
Sure. This is looking at a subset of that operator data I pulled from, just kind of looking at operators operating in the DJ Basin, and looking at the total number of the percentage of no further action requests that each Form 19 or spill release report is achieved. And KPK ranks pretty high in terms of the total number of or the percentage of spills that have received closure.
Thank you. And let's move on to the final bar graph. Can you please describe this bar graph, including what the colored bars mean?
Yeah, this one's a little bit more complicated, but it just kind of summarizes all that data I pulled up above. The orange line is the spill since June 1 of 2022. The blue ones are the number of spills that are still open, and spills and then there's a gray line that show that are spills still open past 90 days. And spills that received an NFA is in the yellow line. And based on that graph, KPK is ranking pretty high in terms of spills that are receiving NFA in terms of their peers.
What about the number of spills open past 90 days on that graph? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, there's some spills that are still open past 90 days. Typically, that's either because we have the Form 19 is pending review with staff. There's a backfill request on there, or some of those have gone to a 27, and we're waiting on the remediation number established in the 27 to close out that Form 19.
And if you don't have that remediation number at the 90th day, then it is indicated as open past 90 days?
Yes.
Thank you. In your opinion, what does all this data show regarding KPK and its implementation of the spill release plan of late?
Yeah, it shows that KPK has been pretty effective in implementing the plan, and compared to their other operators and their peers in the DJ Basin, that they rank pretty well in terms of the number of spills, both in the number of spills per wells operated and the spills that receive a closure.
Thank you. Throughout this hearing, we've heard a lot about forms being returned to draft. Your prior testimony touched on how you worked hard to get caught up on form submittals when you took over for the prior project manager, Ms. Gallus. Can you speak to Marcom's efforts to get caught up on forms?
Yeah, I can. And before I get to that, I just wanted to interject real quick that I'm just super happy that we're talking about forms and the quality of forms and back and forth. And that the tone of this has changed so much since my review of the June hearing. But get back to your question, Mr. Jacobs. I testified previously. I watched a lot of videos of the commissioner's comments during the June hearing and worked hard in early July to get KPK current on its form submittals and move remediations along. I also testified that Marcom may have made some mistakes in their forms. We've worked hard to remedy those mistakes and establish processes to correct those errors or omissions. And while we've identified room for improvement, the real or perceived errors or omissions in those forms are not indicative of an overall non-compliance with the GRIP.
Thank you. Now moving on to implementation schedules. On each of staff's demonstration slides, or many of them, they provided the original GRIP implementation schedule and indicated that several of the deadlines were missed. Can these implementation schedules be updated?
Yes, in fact, we are required to update the schedules on a quarterly basis. The schedules that staff presented were based on the initial data obtained by Marcom for the preparation of the GRIP over a year ago now, and do not represent the data collected since then. Updated implementation schedules have been presented in a subsequent form submittals, which have been approved by staff.
Thank you. So is it possible that some or all of the GRIP implementation schedules shown by staff on those slides are no longer accurate?
Yes, that's correct. GRIP implementation schedules that were shown in the staff's demonstrative have been updated since January of 2022.
Staff also raised concern about KPK's use of the priority risk ranking sheet. Can you describe Marcom's continuous efforts to prioritize site work and communicate with staff regarding prioritization?
Remedial efforts directed by Marcom have always been dictated by risk to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. As such, priority rankings evolved to reflect the new data we've collected during our remedial efforts. I initially reviewed site prioritizations and attachment 5 to the GRIP, and then the revised priorities and subsequent forms. We're now incorporating the risk rankings based on staff's ranking sheet, the Google Doc that we spoke about earlier.
Thank you. Is the priority ranking sheet the only way you've communicated to staff about site priority?
No, for some time, as I started as PM, we've also sent the weekly or biweekly emails with requests for what form reviews to prioritize.
What happens if you're at a hold point on a high priority project?
If we're at a hold point for a work plan approval or the such, Marcom reallocates resources to make sure that the work is continually progressing in all projects. For instance, Marcom will conduct further site investigation in other locations, or will direct KPK's field work in other sites until sampling results or approvals are received. The result is that substantial progress has been made across all these portfolio projects.
We also heard lots of staff testimony about the monthly update for June 2022, submitted in July of 2022. Can you remind the commissioners when you started as project manager?
Yeah, 10 days prior.
And that report that was submitted by you 10 days after you started, that was for work performed before you began as project manager, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Finally, I want to ask you a few questions relating to Mr. Duranlo's testimony last week. In your opinion, are KPK and Marcom synonymous, as Mr. Duranlo testified?
No, absolutely not. As outlined in section 4 of the CPA, KPK was required to hire a primary contractor, and Marcom was retained by KPK as the primary contractor and approved by staff and the commission. As the primary contractor, Marcom has a unique responsibility of overseeing and performing all technical environmental site characterization work. overseeing all scheduling and reporting, the reviewing, the approving and submitting of all forms and documents on reports, and also we're responsible for retaining all communications.
Should the perceived errors in forms and reasons for returning them be to draft be attributed to KPK?
No, in accordance with the CPA, Marcom files forms for CPA projects.
Thank you. Has KPK implemented the work that has been directed by Marcom?
Yeah, just to reiterate, KPK can't proceed with work until Marcom submits and obtains approval for the forms and work plans that we submit in those forms. KPK's been committed to allocating the necessary resources to complete the work that we've been directing. And so far, KPK's commitment has not been an impediment to on-site progress.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time for Mr. Totkes.
You're muted, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Tried to. All right, let's go. Mrs. Stafford, Cross.
Just a couple of brief questions. Good afternoon again, Mr. Totkes. I want to turn back to the rebuttal demonstrative that you were referencing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that demonstrative does not indicate the historic versus, I guess, current spills. Is that correct? Does not account for that?
I did pull data for some of those sites, those operators for the last 5 years just to see, but I didn't depict any of that. I wanted to concentrate since the more releases that were more appropriate to the time frame since the spill response plan or spill notification policy was approved.
And if you've reviewed that data, would you agree with me that roughly only 22% of the KPK spills reported January through October 2022 are historic?
I don't know if I would agree with that. A lot of the
Okay, thank you. I'll move on. And you testified regarding the spill release reporting and training plan, is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
You testified with respect to the implementation of the spill release reporting and training plan.
Yes.
So if you or KPK were following that plan and the rules, wouldn't all the Form 19s be closed within 90 days?
No.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect, Mr. Jacobs.
No redirect for this witness. Thank you.
Questions from commissioners, Commissioner Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for returning to testify again, Mr. Totkes. Could we potentially bring up that demonstrative again and look at it in a little more detail?
Certainly, Mr. Killian is bringing it up right now.
So I wanted to touch on a couple of these numbers. So below the graphical or where it has KPK highlighted there, it talks about spill release and closure data. If we could scroll to the right of that, as we were kind of going by, I wanted to check things. So one of them, it says percentage still open 100%. What one was that for? Okay. That's consistent with the information that's further down in the demonstrative. Is that correct?
Correct. And there's a graph down there, I believe, for that.
Okay. And if we go to the pie chart for a minute, do you know what percentage of wells KPK has in the state compared to the other operators listed here?
No, I didn't pull that metric.
Okay. And if we go down to what I think was the last part of what we looked at here. Yes, this bar chart. So I want to go into a little bit here. The spill's still open and the spill's open past 90 days, which Mr. Jacobs touched on briefly. So do you know what was entailed in some of these other spills? Or are you just looking at the hard data?
No, when the COGCC data, I just pulled up whether or not the Form 19 had been listed as closed or active and whether or not it had been transferred to a Form 27. So I don't have that type of information.
Okay. And is it at all disconcerting to you that looking at the number of spills overall compared to the number that are still open and still open past 90 days, that KPK appears to be significantly higher despite having lower spills than, for example, Kerr-McGee or PDC?
Yeah, a lot of those spills are still open because we're waiting on Form 27 approvals. So I think that's why that metric is still higher.
But these other operators were able to get their Form 27s approved quickly?
I don't have an estimate of the time frame. Again, I just looked at the data on COGCC and whether or not it had been closed or not.
So no real explanation as to why out of 26 bills, KP Cotman has 17 still open, whereas Kerr-McGee out of 159 bills, they have 12 open.
Again, I don't know. I do know that KPK, when I pulled up the data, a lot of the spills were associated with historic releases discovered during P&A activities. So those, we were able to close those out. But then the newer releases have a lot of backfill requests and Form 27 requests in.
And so a lot of these are found during ongoing remediation activities or P&A activities.
Yes.
How many, do you know how many wells KPK has that are still producing or regularly operating?
Just in the metric up above with the total number of wells. I don't know if they're operating or shut in, but they're still listed as either active or, I think it was producing and shut in well count is in yeah, the well count producing and shut in. Yes.
Okay. And that, so just so I can get an idea here. So 1168 are producing and shut in, but you don't have it separated out for how many are still producing versus shut in?
No, just aggregate.
Okay. And so I'm clear, these are all spills that, contrary to some of the arguments that have been made before, we're not looking at things outside the CPA, we're not looking at new spills or anything, but this is talking about spills outside the CPA, is that correct?
It is, and you know, a lot of the data, again, like I spoke about before, a lot of the data that's been presented on the spill response plan are for sites covered out, not in the CPA.
Okay. And do you have any information on, because, and I remember reading information about this and staff specifically pre-hearing statement about there being delays in reporting times for spills. Do you have any information in here about reporting times with respect to these spills?
For the newer spills?
Yes.
You mean in terms of the time allotted between the spill and the spill release reporting date?
Yes.
In my experience of the spills that I've been assisting with KPK, I believe all of them have been reported within the required amount of time.
Have you read staff's pre-hearing statement?
I don't remember reading about that section of it or anything about that in the section.
Okay, and I guess to clarify first, the time to report spills and notify COGC of incidents is part of the spill release policy that you talked about, correct?
Can you say that again?
The spill release reporting, I think you called it policy, not plan, that the time with which you have to notify COGCC staff about any potential spills, incidents, et cetera, is part of that policy, correct?
I remember, yeah, I read it. And we were trained on reporting that immediately to KPK personnel and then making sure that their response, KPK personnel are responsible for submitting the required forms, yes.
Okay, and so, and I'm just sorry, while you were speaking there, I also wanted to let you know I was pulling up staff's pre-hearing statement, and one of the reasons I wanted to touch on this is in paragraph 93 of their pre-hearing statement. It says, since the effective date of the CPA through the date of this pre-hearing statement, so admittedly that goes back to 2021 while you're talking about some instances in 2022. It says KPK has reported 48 spills or releases to staff. And all but 5 of the reported spills releases involve some kind of reporting error. Either it missed the initial COGCC notification or missed a 24-hour notification to local government, missed a 3-day deadline to file an initial spill release report, or incorrect or insufficient information. Do you have any opinions on that statement?
I could speak a little bit about the missed deadlines. As part of my review of the files, when I took over as for the role as the project manager, we identified a lot of, not a lot, I believe in 15 so far, delinquent Form 19s that were missing for these remediation projects covered in the CPA. So as far as I know, 15 of those Form 19 spills that were reported were included for delinquent forms for CPA covered sites.
But do you have, I guess, let me clarify the question a little bit more. So without going to the NFAs, with respect to actual reporting to COGCC of spills or releases, do you have any testimony about the time in which those spills are reported? Not filing of the NFAs or anything like that, Form 19s, but with actual notification of spills or releases.
As far as I know, the spills and releases that I've identified here, the 26, I think there were, all as far as I know, those were submitted in a timely manner, consistent with the rules.
So you disagree with the statement that of the 26 reported since June, all but 5 involve some kind of reporting error?
I would disagree in the sense that the initial Form 19 may have missed some data, but the subsequent 19s, all of the available data is presented in those. So at the time of the initial Form 19, data that's available is presented. And any missing information, including the root cause analysis or anything like that, is provided in a subsequent 19.
And have you been involved in any of the discussions about incorrect or insufficient information about location, size, or extent of the spills or releases?
Can you say that again? I want to make sure I'm answering that correctly.
So sure, and so the very last part of paragraph 93 of the pre-hearing statement, it talks about all but 5 having some kind of reporting error, and it has some examples. And the last example of a reporting error is incorrect or insufficient information about the location, size, extent of spill or release.
Yeah, I thank you for that. If I remember some of the comments that I reviewed on our initial 19 submittals, some of those were volumes were based on initial volumes observed at the time of discovery. And the extent of contamination wasn't known until later when the remedial excavation or response activity was conducted.
And so is that something that's typically classified as an incorrect or insufficient information?
I based on the comments, I would think staff could interpret it that way, yes.
What about anything about location or extent of the spill? Do you remember any kind of information relating to comments on those kind of errors?
Location is relative to like their map location or location relative to receptors?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure. That I'm just reading what's in the pre-hearing statement. That's why I'm trying to get an understanding, because what I'm getting from your testimony is that you've instituted this spill release plan or policy, as it's called, and that under this spill policy, you're taking steps to, as you testified last week, to try and implement this culture of compliance within KPK and really have that from the creating the culture for it to get ingrained in. And you're training people on when to notify, how to notify, who to notify, things like that. And the problem I'm seeing with this is I'm hearing you say things are all going well. Yeah, we still have some outstanding, but we're getting things in. But what I'm seeing in staff's pre-hearing statement is that it's not purely an issue that new spills are getting cleaned up. It's that they're not being reported on time. There's errors in the submissions for the reporting. And these are the kind of things I want to understand, that if you are creating this plan and implementing this plan and creating this culture, that all these kind of issues are being taken care of, not just the fact that spills are eventually getting cleaned up, that they're one, getting cleaned up in a timely manner, and two, they're being reported correctly and complying with the COGCC rules. Because ultimately, that's what everybody from both sides has testified to throughout this hearing, is that the entire point of the CPA is to bring in this culture of compliance and get KPK compliant. And so I just want to make sure that I understand that if you're telling me this spill release reporting policy is effective, it is working, how that we're getting different kind of indications from the pre-hearing statement there. And I'm trying to get a better understanding of why are there delays in reporting for the location, and not just seeing this, I'm not sure if it's a location, an error described about receptors, it's a location described about where the spill occurred, I'm not sure. But since you've been talking about it, I'm just trying to better understand what kind of comments you've seen, what kind of issues you've noticed, because based on what I'm seeing here, there have been numerous issues reported about these notifications that were given to COGCC. And I'm just trying to understand it from KPK's and Marcom's perspective.
I think I know where you're going with that, and I'll try to answer that the best I can. As the primary contractor, I can only encourage KPK to adopt and embrace a culture of compliance. Craig has testified to his testimony that he's the one responsible for implementing that. So again, I can only encourage it. I think the question you're asking is a good example I might be able to provide on that is staff might have the perception that there's been inaccurate or incomplete information provided in forms. A good example of that might be the COSLET A9 Form 19 that was reported, I believe, maybe April of 2022.
Is that the COSLET A9?
COSLET A9.
Okay.
And during that, our review of the data on there, we updated the receptor information, the subsequent Form 27 for that to identify that there was an adjacent wetland. And when we compared that receptor information and entered that into the risk ranking database, we identified that that had not been reported on the Form 19, and that CPW, or Colorado Parks and Wildlife, had not been made aware of the proximity of that in accordance with reporting rule 913H something, if I remember correctly. So in order to correct that deficiency, we notified CPW of the location of that release relative to an adjacent wetland to make sure that we satisfied that reporting requirement. So my understanding is, since that was not included in the initial Form 19, and we were attempting to correct that, that could be conceived by staff as maybe the source of that reporting error, or one of the sources of that.
And again, just to clarify, when was that reporting done that declared that it was near a wetland?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
When was the reporting done that told COGCC it was near a wetland?
I believe we submitted that notification in December of 2022.
Okay, so is that included on one of the 26 that are identified within your demonstrative?
Oh, it was submitted in a Form 27, a recently submitted Form 27, and I also had emailed CPW. Is that your question?
So in your demonstrative, you're talking about 26 spills or releases identified since June of 2022. And so what I'm trying to understand, so you said that update was provided in December of 2022, but initially that spill was reported, I believe, based on previous testimony, in December of 2020. And so what I'm trying to understand is that one of these 26 new spills that you're talking about in your demonstrative?
No, I don't believe it is.
Okay, so, and this is what I want to understand is, according to staff, and not saying it's correct or not, I'm just trying to understand this. According to staff, the 26 you identified in that demonstrative, all but 5 had some sort of error in the reporting for these new spills. And so I'm trying to understand if you have any more information on those new spills and the errors that occurred. And again, it doesn't say break out how many were for missed notifications, how many were for missed notifications to local government, but it says there were errors or incorrect or insufficient information in all but 5 of those 26. So 21 of these 26 that you're identifying apparently had issues. And I'm just trying to get your understanding and explanation so we can kind of piece together what staff is saying about these reporting issues compared to what KPK is saying is happening in these issues.
Yeah, one of the other instances that might help shed some light on that, I know some comments have been regarding missed landowner notifications. And since some of these spills were reported during P&A activities or plugging and abandoning of a facility, a staff might have thought maybe that the notification to the landowner was missed, but the landowners were made aware of the P&A activities. And then I believe also there was a subsequent Form 19 where, you know, they were made aware of a potential release discovered during those P&A activities.
And so that's at least one of the confusion that you know of that's come up.
I'm trying to think of the site, but I remember there was a COA where maybe that was a concern that the landowner had not been made aware, that they were aware during the P&A activities, and they had also been notified when that work was to begin. So I think that's my understanding of where one of those comments may have come from.
And is this kind of seeing this information? I know you said you hadn't read their pre-hearing statement before, but kind of seeing this information, do you believe that that kind of reporting and double checking for errors is something that needs to be further addressed in the spill reporting policy, or do you think it's something that is addressed and just needs to be improved upon?
I would say it's been addressed and it needs to be improved upon. I would agree with that statement. So again, yeah, that's
okay. And so just one last time, just for clarification purposes, the fact that 17 of the 26 are still open, you don't have any understanding as to why some of the others that may have more spills have less open. You just know that there are different reasons that some of the Form 19s are still outstanding with respect to the new spills for KPK. Is that correct?
with the other operators spill data.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just looked at the metrics available on COGCC regarding whether or not the forms were closed or not.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Takis, for being with us here again. Just a couple of questions, because understanding that I'm not able to read the demonstrative that you're presenting hardly at all. And so I'm just going to ask you some questions about that because it wasn't clear. I mean, I'm squinting trying to read it, but I mean, you seem to be comparing KPK to other operators. And so I'm trying to understand if we're really looking at an apple to apple comparison here, if we're just trying to spin some statistics to make a point. And so to Commissioner Cross's questions, KPK has different number of total wells than the other operators, and a lot of the operators that you appear to be showing in that demonstrative have significantly more wells than KPK. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I tried to give a pretty broad cross section of operators and their well counts.
And so in that case, we're not really from a percentage standpoint, not comparing apples to apples. It's really apples to oranges in that case, isn't it?
I don't think that's the case at all, Commissioner. I think it's
I mean, if you're trying to bring a percentage to like overall number of spills, and KPK has 1,200 wells or whatever it indicated on your demonstrative, and another operator has 4,000 wells, and you say that based on the overall number of wells, we've got 20% on one and 22% on another. that's skewing the data a little bit, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think it's important to paint the picture to the commissioners, including yourself, that KPK does have releases, and that their number of releases is not any better or worse than any other operators, based on well counts or other indicators. That's why I did the trend line analysis to kind of give you an understanding of what's average for each operator and their operating wells, or the total number of wells that I had in the table.
But it would be important to note that over the number of wells, the percentage of shut in or inactive wells versus the number of active wells as you're doing that analysis, wouldn't it? Because if you have an inactive well or a shut in well, I mean, argumentatively, it should have less risk of spill and release than an active well. Isn't that fair to say?
Could you clarify that a little bit more?
If
Are you asking if
inactive or a
the number
shut-in
of
well,
operating? Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Sorry.
if you have a shut in or an inactive well, or even a temporarily abandoned well that's not producing, it should have less risk of spill than an active well. Is that fair to say?
So I just pulled up the metric only on the number of active and shut-in wells available on the database.
But-
I don't have the metrics on the number of actual operating wells.
No, but you didn't answer the question. The question I asked was a shut-in, inactive, or temporarily abandoned well that is not producing has a less risk of spill or release than an active well. Is that fair to say?
I mean, partially.
This is
I
in
mean,
your
if you had a well
professional
seal
opinion that
failure
I'm
or
asking.
something, I mean, based on it being the shut-in status, if you had a well seal failure, I guess it would still represent a threat.
But less than an active well. Is that fair? Where it's moving product through pipelines into tanks, moving into storage vehicles, whatever the processes are. I mean, in
There's
your
a higher-
professional opinion, as a professional in this field, is it more likely that you're going to see spills and releases from a active operation versus a inactive shut-in or temporarily abandoned situation?
I would say once a fluid enters a distribution or flow line system, the potential for a release would increase. But I
Okay.
don't have the number of that metric to compare.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to also understand I mean, and maybe I'm misunderstanding your testimony, but that Marcom, once you came on to Marcom, then things began improving, which makes me feel like you're saying that Marcom was not a quality company before you came on board, or was not compliant with the CPA, or was not doing the work that it was contracted to do by KPK. Is that what you're insinuating?
No, not at all. My understanding of Marcom's role prior to my coming on board was Marcom was helping with sites covered by the CPA, other spilled reports, and other Form 19s and non-CPA covered sites that were not associated with the CPA were mostly being handled by KPK. After I came on board, our involvement with the initial Spill 19 form reporting process for non-CPA covered sites was increased, as well as our Form 27 reporting responsibilities for non-CPA covered sites.
But Marcom was hired by KPK as a contractor as part of the CPA in order to handle remediation work associated with the CPA prior to your arrival, correct?
Correct.
And so when a contractor hires a company like Marcom, that company is responsible for the work that Marcom's doing, correct? If a company is hired to plug and abandon a company's operations, or a company's hired to do environmental remediation services, ultimately the responsibility lies on the operator that is hiring that company, and as to whether or not that company is following through on its obligations to the operator. Is that fair to say?
Well, in the case of the CPA, Marcom and its primary contractor role has a little bit more. Well, not a little bit more, has more authority to direct the responsibility to direct the work of KPK. KPK's responsibility to us as a client is to oversee the work, verify that we're prioritizing the work according to the documents that were in the CPA, and independently verifying that we're doing the work for them. But we are
For them,
responsible
right.
for developing and implementing the remedial work plans and for the sites in the CPA.
But you're hired by KPK to do that work. Is that correct? You're being reimbursed by KPK for the work that you're doing, and you've signed a contract with KPK to do this work. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's the questions I have right now. Thank you, Mr. Takis.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just going to apologize if I'm muddying waters. I thought I understood what that data was about, and now I think I'm not sure. So I'm just going to apologize for for rehashing. So I think what you said that data shows are spills since June 2020 compared to other operators, but not spills related to projects in the CPA.
No, I want to make sure I'm quoting my statistics correctly. The Form 19s that we've submitted were a combination of the new spills and releases. And I think there were additional Form 19 submitted to cover historic releases not previously reported prior to the Form 27 submittals, including P&A projects.
Okay, so I'm not sure I'm getting my question answered. I'm sorry. So that data that you showed comparing your KPK to other operators says spills since June 2020 to 2022. Sorry, 2022, right?
June 1st of 2022 to January 19th.
And so are those all of KPK spills, including any additional spills that may have happened at CPA sites since June?
Correct.
Is it all spills?
All Form 19, yes.
Okay, so so I'm getting a little muddled because I think Mr. Jacobs was saying that he doesn't want spills since the CPA to be introduced. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, Mr. Jacobs. Introduced as part of our discussion about whether or not there's compliance with the CPA itself. Am I understanding this correctly, or can you clarify for me?
Mr. Chair, with your permission.
Go ahead.
We asked Mr. Topkis to look at spills reported via Forms 19 in the last year, in the last 7 months, as a metric to evaluate the implementation of the spill release and reporting training plan. There is probably no other more important information than the number of spills reported and how they're responded to and closed out. And that's what Mr. Topkis did. We're staying at a high level looking at Form 19s. We're not talking about any new spill in isolation. We do wish to and have argued, and I think this commission has agreed that it's not appropriate to talk about those more specifically, but at a high level using COGCC data to evaluate how we're implementing our plan and how we stack up on at least those metrics available from COGCC to our peers in the industry. We think that's a useful comparison.
Okay.
You agree that it's the only comparison? Perhaps not, but that's the reason for this testimony at a high level. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yes, I think so. Thank you. So I'm wondering, when you also look at data, is it possible to look at, so I see that we're seeing like how long it takes someone to do their Form 19 and close out with a Form 27. I think that's what we're saying with your data. Is there data that shows the average time that a project remains open until it reaches NFA? And I'm wondering if you looked at that data.
I didn't look at that data. I would have to pull up all the individual Form 19s to pull up that metric, and I didn't do that deep of a dive into the data. I just wanted to kind of give you a broad overview of a comparison to KPK spill response and closure percentages based on their peers.
Thank you. And then, so I know that you've said that you believe that some of these forms are still open because you're waiting for Form 27. So out of those spills that you had in your spreadsheet, how many of those are waiting for returns of Form 27s?
If I remember correctly, 5 or 6.
We pull up the demonstrative. You need to refer to that. Mr. Takas,
What was that?
do you wish to refer to the demonstrative? Would that help you answer the question?
I think that would, yes, please.
Mr. Killian, if I may, Mr. Chair,
Yes,
thank you. Just trying to
If we I believe if you scroll down, we can answer the commissioner's question.
to the bar chart at the bottom
Yes, please.
and zoom in a little.
I believe the yellow line represents, yeah, the spills that, no, I'm sorry, the blue line is the number of spills that are still open. The gray line is the spills that are still open past 90 days, and our yellow line is the spills that have received an NFA. So commissioners, your question would be, there are 17 forms still open, and 11 that are still open past 90 days. And when I looked at that data, the big difference there would be the Form 27. So I believe it was 6 that are still waiting a Form 27 approval.
And of those 6 that are still waiting approval, I think that staff has an interesting point, which is sometimes the delay is perhaps on our staff's part. Sometimes the delay is when a form gets returned to I'll just say you all. And they're waiting for you to update it, do the condition of approval, and then send it back. Do you know what status those that are waiting? Are they all in our court, COGCC's court?
I want to make sure I'm reviewing. I'm trying to think of all the data I reviewed to answer that correctly. I believe they are, and I believe none of them are CPA sites.
Okay. Thank you.
other questions for this witness? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Totkus, for reappearing before us today. Appreciate your time and preparation. Thank you. I think most of what I had to say was covered by the other commissioners, so I'll just also note that my understanding is that spills post CPA were not to be part of this hearing. I think staff may have had some comments, based on the comments that they were admonished for, that might be applicable to KPK's continued compliance associated with ongoing spills, and difficult to see that line short-stopped on that side and then applied on this side. I just wanted to make that observation. That said, the metric that I saw in there, and I won't make you pull it back up, I did not get all the calculations on there between all the zooming, but would, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mr. Totkus, but it would appear that on those spills since June of 2022, that 65% of those spills are still open. Does that, I've got 26 of 17 is what I saw from the metric and calculated at 65%. Does that sound right to you?
I believe that is, the percentage sounds about right, but the numbers are correct based on the bar graph.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And then, I noticed that some of the other operators, particularly those with more spills in general, had a much higher closure rate. And just wanted to ask you to expound a little bit on how you feel that on those spills since the closure of the CPA, still being at a very high open rate compared to other operators, demonstrates a movement towards compliance on the part of KPK.
Closing out the spills.
No, having a high percentage of spills still in post-CPA environment as compared to other operators. It doesn't appear to me at face value that that demonstrates compliance as compared to other operators. Can you expand on your thoughts about that?
Yeah, none of the spills that are still open are CPA covered sites, since we have active remediation numbers on them. Even though some of the Form 19s might have been delinquent and those spill reporting, we're able to close those CPA covered spill reports under their active remediation numbers.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that. And, my question was more along the lines of one of the intents of the CPA is to create a culture of compliance with ongoing spills, which again, I was under I don't want to talk about too much because I was under the impression that we're trying not to talk about those, but as they were raised in this demonstrative, my understanding is that a high percentage of unclosed spills since that time doesn't demonstrate to me a culture of improving compliance. And so I want to make sure that I'm reading that right, and that there is a 65% unclosed spill rate since 2022 of June of 2022.
Yeah, maybe this will help if I'm not, I might have to put my lawyer hat on here and well, staff might have to comment. But all the metrics I pulled up are since June 1st to kind of provide some clarity since the last update hearing. The percentage of open spills that I think you're speaking about, Mr. Commissioner, is a lot of those we have them on the path to closure either through a Form 27 or an active NFA request or some other backfill request, whatever it might be. So I don't think the percentage being high is necessarily indicative of the progress being made on closing those active spills.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Totkus. I've heard that same argument associated with the spills within the CPA as well. I appreciate your comments.
Other questions? All right, my fellow commissioners did a fair job of questioning. I don't have any questions. Mr. Jacobs, any redirect?
I have no further questions for this witness. Thank you, Mr. Totkus.
Okay. Mr. Jacobs, do you have further witnesses on rebuttal?
Could I get a time check real quick before I answer that? Thank you.
Give me one moment. KPK has 10 minutes, 33 seconds remaining, and staff has 10 minutes and 18 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Ms. Larson.
I believe we're done with rebuttal testimony. Thank you.
Okay, if that is the case, then I believe next we will move to closings. First, a closing from staff and then a closing from KPK. I would suggest to the attorneys and staff to let's take like a 10-minute break before we start closings. So let's come back at 2:21. All right, welcome back. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We were back on the record in 201-100-261. We are now teed up for closing arguments from both sides. Ms. Stafford, both sides have 10 minutes and change for their closings. Ms. Stafford, on behalf of staff, I believe you will go first.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Good afternoon again, commissioners. Again, for the record, I am Assistant Attorney General Caitlin Stafford on behalf of staff. Has KPK achieved substantial compliance with Section 4 of the Compliance Plan Agreement? That is the purpose of this hearing and for the commission to decide today. Over the course of this hearing, we've talked a lot about what it means to substantially comply. KPK has attempted to frame staff's assessment of their dismal performance as nitpickings about mere technicalities. KPK has argued that substantial compliance means compliance with, quote, essential requirements or, quote, core Section 4 requirements of the CPA. Essentially, a checklist. Was a document titled monthly report or waste plan or GRIP submitted on time? If so, yes, mission accomplished, according to KPK. But KPK's interpretation of substantial compliance is both strained from much of the case law they cite in support and, frankly, from the reality on site at the remedial project subject to this CPA. Throughout all of this, KPK has avoided much discussion about a key piece of substantial compliance: implementation, as measured by closure of numerous aging remediation projects and a return to compliance with COGCC rules. It is KPK's burden to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that they are in substantial compliance with Section 4 of the CPA. So what evidence did KPK present to you that they are in substantial compliance with Section 4? KPK's witnesses talked to you about filling out paperwork, with little reference to the quality of such submissions. KPK pointed to, quote, an improved culture of compliance, and then presented a litany of excuses for their failures to achieve closures on projects subject to the CPA. They explained that communication is hard over email. There's a lot of work to do. The lab is slow. Our forms get returned to draft too much. The weather, the landowner, the list goes on. KPK foisted the blame on others, whether that be staff, their lab, frustrated landowners, and at one point, even their own primary contractor. KPK has presented you with a carousel of excuses that keeps them riding in circles and unable to make forward progress on site. And KPK is asking you to prolong the ride with no concrete demonstration that actual impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources have been addressed at the site subject to the CPA. KPK also spent a lot of time during these proceedings talking about the money it has spent, anywhere from $7 to $9 million, as part of its obligations under the CPA. They presented you with data in Table 2 to their pre-hearing statement and in witness testimony to quantify how many samples they've collected, how many cubic yards of waste they had excavated. They even told you about how they went out in the field last Friday to try to remedy potential compliance concerns raised during this hearing. But the amount of money spent, number of samples taken, and measurement of dirt removed from the ground do nothing to explain how exactly KPK has substantially complied with this CPA. The purpose of this plan is to achieve closure of remediation projects and to comply with the Commission's rules. The metric that most accurately explains substantial compliance is whether these sites, some of which were open for more than a year or even two preceding the effective date of the CPA, are being closed in a timely manner. And the answer to that question, has KPK substantially complied with the CPA, is, as staff has shown you through evidence, testimony, and the entire record in this matter, unequivocally no. KPK has not carried its burden in this hearing. KPK likes to remind everyone that this is a 5-year plan. Well, let's go through that a little bit more. It has now been 14 months and 3 weeks since the CPA was signed. We should be just over 20% of the way through this plan. Spreading the remediation projects on attachment A over 5 years leaves you with about 12 of the remediation projects that should be completed and achieve closure each year. And where are we? 3 out of 58 have achieved closure. None of the 4 NOAV sites are closed. As of the date this hearing began, January 25th, and as you heard in staff's testimony, Grant has been open for 1,548 days. Soil spread field has been open for 898 days. The UPRR 43 Pan Am Consolidation G number 2 has been open for 858 days. And the NESU Consolidated has been open for 949 days. But KPK continues to point to remediation projects that they say are close to closure, arguing there are about 10 of those. Even those sites they point to are not as close as they suggest, based on evidence in the record and testimony from staff. Most importantly, however, they told you this same story in the June hearing, were close to closure on multiple sites, and only one more has actually been closed to date due to a technicality. Unreliable, incapable, and impactful. Commissioners, I originally used these words to describe KPK and its operations in the state of Colorado at the beginning of the fall 2021 enforcement hearings. Little, if anything, has changed. KPK remains unreliable because KPK cannot meet deadlines or approve timelines in the CPA and frequently submits reporting that does not contain enough information to comply with COGCC rules. KPK remains incapable because KPK cannot fulfill its obligations to the COGCC or to the people of the state of Colorado and operate in a manner that is protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. And KPK remains impactful because, as staff has shown you again and again, KPK cannot timely and adequately clean up its aging legacy messes. There are real ongoing impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife that persist in the field. It's easy to see when you simply drive by a majority of these remediation sites. Based on the pre-hearing filings and the evidence and testimony you have heard, the up-to-date site information staff shared with you through its exhibits, its pictures, there can be no question. KPK is still not in compliance with Section 4 of the CPA. Therefore, staff requests you enter a finding that KPK has not substantially complied with Section 4 and levy the portions of the penalty unsuspended in June. Further, upon a finding that KPK has still not achieved substantial compliance, staff and the director request the commission consider terminating the CPA, imposing other remaining outstanding portions of the penalty, suspending any or all of KPK's certificates of clearance, and or refusing to issue KPK new oil and gas development plans, as set forth in Section 7, Paragraph 5 of the CPA. KPK touted their progress during this hearing, but that was progress, not compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, unlike witnesses, we normally don't have questions under closing, but if there's an extraordinary question that's lurking on the tip of your tongue, lay it out now. Okay. With that, thank you, staff, for the closing. We now will turn to the closing of KPK. And Mr. Jacobs, you have the floor.
Chairman Robbins, commissioners, we appreciate your time and attention over the last few days. Excuse me. The commission must, apologies, may I start over? Can we reset the clock? I had a glitch with my text.
Sure, go ahead.
I appreciate your indulgence. Chairman Robbins, commissioners, we appreciate your time and attention over the last few days. On Wednesday, you clarified the applicable scope of this hearing. The commission must determine whether KPK is in compliance with the essential requirements of Section 4 of the CPA. For 3 days, you heard evidence from KPK describing its compliance with the essential requirements. I'd like to walk you through this compliance one essential requirement at a time. Before I start, though, I offer one overarching observation. These proceedings have pitted staff and KPK against each other, and the testimony you've heard over the last 3 days has demonstrated, at a minimum, that there are two sides to this story. There were numerous examples of this, but let me identify just one as an illustration. Staff's primary witness, Ms. Graber, testified that KPK has conducted no recent work at NESU consolidation. But Marcom's project manager, Levi Kirk, testified that on December 14, 2022, staff's own contractor, Apex, observed Marcom perform background and additional confirmatory sampling at the site. With the results of those samples now in hand, Marcom is scheduled to return to this site at the end of this week to conduct further remedial and excavation. In short, staff's testimony that there was no recent work at the site was neither objective nor accurate. It is profoundly regrettable that we are engaged in an adversarial proceeding between the parties rather than compiling lists of grievances and rather than compiling lists of grievances and alleged shortcomings. We should be bending over backwards to communicate and cooperate with and support each other to solve problems and achieve common goals through the CPA. Regrets aside, though, fairness demands that, particularly where antagonisms are so evident, you cannot accept one party's version of events as gospel, and we urge you to keep that in mind when weighing Ms. Graber's and Mr. Duranlo's testimony. Commissioners, I submit that testimony and evidence that is not reasonably disputed demonstrate that KPK has substantially complied with each of the 5 essential elements of Section 4 of the CPA. Number 1, KPK must retain a qualified engineering firm to perform technical work under the CPA and oversee all associated scheduling and reporting. KPK did that and is doing that. It retained Marcom in November 2021 and has worked closely with Marcom ever since. As required by the CPA, Marcom completes all the technical work under the CPA and is responsible for completing and submitting all required forms for CPA governed sites. And Marcom's oversight and supervision of work has been good. Number 2, KPK must implement the GRIP for attachment A locations, and it must submit supplemental forms 27 and comply with COAs for the adjudicated NOAB locations. KPK heard you loud and clear at the June hearing. KPK needs to stop just talking about compliance and actually show meaningful progress at CPA sites. We'll start that issue with unburying the lead here. Contrary to staff's suggestion, showing substantial compliance does not mean that KPK must have achieved closure of CPA covered sites less than a year after finalizing the GRIP. There is no metric of that type in the CPA. The point of the CPA is to promote KPK's return to compliance with the rules over a period of 5 years. To show substantial progress with the CPA at this point means to show progress at the 72 CPA covered sites. Over the last 3 days, you heard testimony from KPK's Executive Director, Craig Meese, project managers Kevin Totkus and Levi Kirk from Marcom, and seasoned environmental professional Richard Price about the significant on-the-ground progress KPK has made to remediate the CPA sites. Marcom's project manager, Levi Kirk, testified to the global progress made at the 72 sites covered by the CPA. 3 have NFA. 9 additional sites are very close to closure. Of the remaining CPA sites, KPK is on track, per Mr. Kirk, to complete remediation at roughly 50% of the CPA governed sites by the end of 2023, if allowed to continue. You also heard Levi Kirk describe the progress that has been made at over a dozen specific sites. I won't recount those specifics here. Rather, I'd urge you to consider the facts and photos Mr. Kirk recounted when weighing them against the story staff told on Thursday and this morning. Craig Meese testified about the substantial volumes of soil excavated, 46,000 tons, and backfilled, almost 7,000 tons, the vast majority of which was for CPA sites. That KPK was prioritizing backfill requests, and KPK has submitted numerous requests for backfill that remain pending staff's review. You heard in the last 6 months, Marcom has taken 1,215 samples at 64 locations. And as for sites open for years, those numbers are misleading. This CPA is only 14 months old, and the GRIP hasn't even been, will have its first anniversary from implementation of a draft GRIP in 2 days on February 1st. You heard testimony of expert witness Greg Weiss about the immense resources KPK has invested in remediating the CPA sites. Since November 1, 2021, KPK has expended over $7.2 million to fund attachment A remediation projects. That kind of investment shows that KPK is not merely pushing paper, but investing all available funds into remediating the 72 CPA sites. You also heard testimony from expert witness Richard Price, who has 35 years of EHS regulatory compliance and remediation experience and college teaching credentials in the field. Mr. Price testified about how a remediation portfolio of this size, covering 72 sites, takes the sort of time contemplated by the CPA's 5-year term, of which he is a fan, and that progress can seem slow at first. So staff would like you to believe that KPK's operations remain unchanged since the CPA was signed, or even since June, but the data pulled from staff's own COGCC database don't bear this out. You heard from Mr. Totkus that KPK's Form 19 spill response performance per number of wells active, that's the COGCC's metric in COGCC, is comparable to or better than some of Colorado's largest operators. And contrary to staff's arguments in its PHS, in its pre-hearing statement, that is just argument, not evidence and testimony regarding reasons for alleged errors or evidence of alleged errors in Forms 19, which were the subject of some of the commissioner's questions of Mr. Totkus. Number 3, KPK must submit a spill release reporting and training plan, a comprehensive waste management plan, and a flow line system integrity evaluation and integrity management plan. The parties do not dispute that these plans were timely submitted, and except for the flow line integrity plan that only recently became due with revisions responsive to integrity staff comments, these plans have all been approved. This point is critical. Having timely submitted these plans and received staff's approval, KPK has complied with express language of the CPA that states as long as KPK submits the waste management plan or spill training plan that is ultimately approved on or before December 31, KPK will be deemed to have complied with this requirement, etc. You also heard testimony from Craig Meese and Levi Kirk about how KPK is implementing these plans. Marcom has conducted 2 different training sessions for KPK and Marcom staff and is currently working to finalize a formal online training program for new employees. When a new spill has occurred, KPK has followed the process required by rules and in accordance with the spill training plan. Even before the waste management plan's recent approval, KPK has made significant improvements to its BMPs, including installing improved fencing materials like barbed wire and cattle fence at many sites. You were shown at least one image of an orange snow fence that staff claimed was sagging, and you heard Mr. Kirk testify that Marcom is in the field every day inspecting sites to ensure BMPs remain in place and do not deteriorate. Number 4, KPK must maintain a dedicated project account and submit monthly account statements. The parties do not dispute that these account statements have been timely submitted. I will simply refer you to exhibits J through K documenting this compliance. Number 5, KPK must submit monthly and quarterly compliance reports. Staff does not dispute that KPK has submitted 16 monthly and quarterly compliance reports since the CPA was signed, 1 for every month and quarter. Staff has provided comments on just 4 of those, and as you heard, Mr. Totkus and Mr. Kirk have responded to staff's constructive comments by incorporating suggested changes into already lengthy periodic reports. The evidence you've heard over the last week establishes by a preponderance of the evidence that KPK is in substantial compliance with the essential requirements of Section 4 of the CPA. But if after weighing the evidence you should disagree, you also heard expert forensic accounting and energy economist testimony, why you should not impose the most severe enforcement options available to you under Section 7.5 of the CPA. KPK has invested all available resources in attempting to comply with the CPA. If that effort has fallen slightly short in your judgment, it is only because KPK is just over a year into implementing a 5-year plan to promote KPK's return to compliance with the rules. Staff has not evaluated the consequences of shutting down KPK's operations should this commission decide to exercise its enforcement options under the CPA. But we do know that imposing the suspended penalties would impair KPK's ability to make further progress under the CPA and could render KPK insolvent, which in turn could force the state of Colorado to absorb the remediation work KPK has spent $7.2 million addressing in just the last 14 months. And as you heard Dr. Considine testify, KPK's Spindlefield assets could be shut in or tied up in bankruptcy for years, which in turn could significantly delay and impair the state's unique opportunity to inject CO2 from regional sources, permanently sequester carbon in that field, and supercharge the state's climate action goals and mandates. The only viable path forward is to continue under the CPA and give the plan time to ensure KPK's return to compliance with the rules, and continued adherence to the requirements of the CPA and its comprehensive plans that exceed current rules requirements will ensure the protection of public health, safety, welfare, and the environment with continued oversight by staff and its contractor. We therefore respectfully request that you find KPK has substantially complied with the essential requirements of the CPA and or permit it to continue its work thereunder. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jacobs. For the record, you went over, but I allowed you to finish up.
Thank you.
So that you know, since you've been concerned about time constraints. Any questions from commission? Okay. AAG Davenport, could you visualize yourself? Welcome. Thank you for being with us. At this point, we have heard from both parties with regard to cases in chief, rebuttals, and closing statements. The next step will be deliberations. Preceding that, there'll be a step procedurally. When are we going to do deliberations? But am I correct that the initial next step could possibly be closing the record?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. The commission can close the record now or in the future, depending on the level of comfort with the information you've got and whether or not it's possible that you may need to ask more questions of the parties in the future. One option is to close the record now and reopen it later if you're not going right into deliberations. But it's up to you what you'd like to do in terms of closing the record.
So if we close the record and then take a little time, go through our notes, decide that we need to hear from a witness again, I hope that's not the case, but that's just me. Can we reopen the record?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would think it's best to go ahead and close the record. And then we can move into procedurally next steps in terms of deliberations, when, where, and how. Are commissioners comfortable with that, knowing that if extraordinary circumstances, we can reopen it? I think we've heard quite a bit. Do we have a motion to close the record?
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion from Commissioner Cross, second from Commissioner Ackerman to close the record. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The record is closed. Okay, commissioners, the last step of this hearing process is commissioner deliberations. We have multiple options in front of us. We could move into deliberations now. If commissioners are comfortable with that, we could take the matter under advisement and move to deliberate at a subsequent day or date. I have taken the liberty of checked calendars, and it appears that if we wanted to take 24 hours, we could return tomorrow, or a little less than 24 hours to return tomorrow from 12 to 2. There's an opening on all commissioners' calendars, or there's a movable opening. Perhaps some of us have some things, but they could be moved. And then there's also an opportunity if we wanted to do it Wednesday, February 1st, upon adjournment of, or upon conclusion of our normal general docket. We could take it up then. I believe we've got 2 OGDPs and maybe another little something on Wednesday. So that would be probably midday, late morning on Wednesday. I'm just one commissioner that I would suggest that we take a day or so to go through our notes and be further prepared to deliberate, as opposed to jumping right in right now. We've had 2.5 days of a lot of information, but that's one commissioner's thoughts. What are other commissioners' thoughts? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would concur. I think it's helpful to take a moment and review notes, collect your thoughts, and be prepared for deliberations. As Wednesday is a hearing day, it makes most sense for me to do it upon adjournment of our initial items on Wednesday's agenda. You know, if that's 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, if we want to create a date certain, I think 2 o'clock would be fine, but or a time certain, I mean. But Wednesday would be my choice.
Others with thoughts? And I'm fine with Wednesday for what it's worth. Commissioner Ackerman?
Just not much to add, Mr. Chair. I'm okay with either one. And as we're trending towards Wednesday, I'm all right with that as well.
Commissioner Cross, Commissioner McGowan, any thoughts? Commissioner Cross?
It sounds like it's preferable for everyone to take some additional time. I'm still gathering a little bit of my notes from today's testimony. I would be ready to go even later today, I think, as I spend some time over the weekend trying to go through my notes. But I agree. I think Wednesday at the conclusion of our other items on our agenda would probably be appropriate.
Does that work for you, Commissioner McGowan? Okay, nodding of a head up and down. To Ms. Stafford and Mr. Jacobs, we can define a determinate time. As Commissioner Messner noted, we'd probably have to be, cautious and go a little later in the day because we just don't know how long the OGDP hearings are going to go. So I would suggest 2 p.m. We could also take it up after we're done with the other agendized matters. And that would be kind of like a, wait and see. I'm happy to do either and would like to accommodate your calendar schedules, et cetera, on Wednesday. Mr. Jacobs, do you have any thoughts about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd prefer the time certain, 2 o'clock if possible.
Okay.
With the continuation of this hearing, you may imagine I have other obligations that occupy my calendar.
Ms. Stafford?
My calendar is completely open.
Okay. Ms. Larson, are you with us? Is 2 p.m. a
time that we can set in stone?
well, I mean,
It
is it a time that looks reasonable to you, given the agenda's items that morning? I mean, like, will we be done and then be able to take a little bit of a break for lunch? And then, I mean, does that look like that's a pretty good guess?
I anticipate so. I hope that we should be able to wrap the business, excuse me, that we have scheduled for Wednesday by about noon or so. And
Okay.
even if it runs late, we should be done by about 1 o'clock.
Okay. All right, then I believe we are looking for a motion to continue this matter to Wednesday. Geez, that's going to be February 1st at 2 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Ackerman, second by Commissioner Cross. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, this matter is continued to February 1st, this Wednesday at 2 p.m. The commissioners and I want to thank staff and Mr. Jacobs and his group for articulating their positions and presenting well for us. We appreciated the professionalism that was rendered in this matter. We will be looking at our notes between now and then, and we look forward to coming back and having our deliberations on Wednesday, February 1st at 2 p.m. We are adjourned.
Thank you.